So there's this phrase that you may or may not have heard of, but it says, "No good deed goes unpunished." Have you heard of that one? Right? It's a cynical commentary on how sometimes acts of kindness and goodness are not received well and they backfire. Okay, it's definitely a cynical way of looking at the world. And an example is, say you try to help someone and they take it as you thinking they're incompetent, right? And so you were trying to be helpful, like, "Oh, can I help you?" And they're just like, "What? Like, I can do this myself." And it's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," right? And people who've experienced that might think, no good deed goes unpunished, right? And on a famous historical example, this goes like way back into the origins of where this phrase came from, is with Dirk Willems. He was a Dutch Anabaptist martyr back in 1569. Anabaptists, their like spiritual descendants are like the Amish and the Mennonites, so they come from that a line of faith, right? But he was imprisoned for a belief in the believer's baptism, and the believer's baptism is just simply it goes away from the Catholic tradition of infant baptisms, right, where you get baptized when you make a personal confession of faith, right? And you're thinking like, that's pretty normal. Well, at one point, you go to jail for that, right? In those days, okay? And so he's in jail and he escapes, and he's being chased by a guard because he's escaped, and this is in winter. So the prison that they were in was actually like a converted palace. So I had a moat. So the moat is frozen. So he's like running across, and the guard is chasing him, and the guard actually falls through the water, and he's like, because falling in frozen water is like instant death. Not instant death, just almost instant death, right? But so Dirk actually stops and goes back and helps the guard and saves his life. And so the guard was very thankful. He wanted to like kind of let him go, but it's also his job. And so the chief magistrate of the prison was like, "No, you can't let him go." And so Dirk goes back in prison, and the following spring he is burned at the stake, right? So no good deed goes unpunished, right? It's just like, and so today we're in Ezra. We're in part 2. We're in chapters 4 to 8, and we're going to see how the act of rebuilding the temple brings a lot of opposition to the returning exiles, or the return to exile, right? And so we're going to go through chapters 4 to 8. We're going to do that pretty quickly, and then we're going to see, okay, what does this mean for us, okay? So chapter 4, it's the opposition, and you'll see some of the dates up there. Oh, no, did I write this wrong? No, we're good. All right, and so this is like no. Okay, that should be 536 to 520, not 636, okay? So because it's a 16-year period. Okay, so this chapter covers, quite a bit of time. Okay, and so Zerubbabel, right, love that name, he is rebuilding the temple, and what happens is the locals who are there, they want to help, right? And Zerubbabel says, "No, you can't help," right? And so some of this is like, hey, what's going on here, right? So remember, when the Jewish people get defeated and they're exiled, right, the remaining people there are like the really poor. All the prominent people have been exiled and deported, and then the Babylonians then bring a lot of their people into Jerusalem in the area. And so over time, remember, a lot of years has passed. There's intermarriage. So basically, the whole like worship of God is kind of like forgotten. And so the locals are like, "Oh, hey, we want to help." And Zerubbabel has this thought of like, "Hey, like we want just the Jewish people who are worshipers of the Lord to build this." Okay. Now the interesting thing is this. This was Zerubbabel's decision. God never said, "Oh, you can't have locals help, or you can't have anybody else help." However, the Bible also says, like in verse 1, that these are enemies of Judah and Benjamin. So these are not particularly friendly people. And then after Zerubbabel says no to them, they set out, and this is verse 4, right? They set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid of to go on building. All right, so their true colors kind of show. So like their true intentions may not have been very helpful. Okay, and the opposition isn't only through like intimidation and fear. You also have bribery in verse 5. It says, they bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Okay, and then so there's fear, there's intimidation, there's bribery, there's also a lot of lies. Actually, the rest of the chapter from verse 6 to 24 is really about the people who basically spreading a lot of lies back to Babylon, and these lies have some facts in it, right? And those are always like the most effective lies, right? If you just say stuff that makes no sense, well, some people will believe it, but most of the time people are, right? But if you use facts in a out of context, misleading way, you can really spread lies. And that's what they did. And then if you're thinking about it, you're like, wait a minute, fear, intimidation, bribery, lies, like, that happens all the time. Like humanity has not veered from that strategy, and it works. And so the work is halted on the temple for about 15 years. Okay, that's why this chapter takes over time, because so 15 years they have to stop working. In verse 23 it says, as soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes, that is, so the people then went to Artaxerxes and say, hey, like, don't let them build. Artaxerxes listens, writes a letter back to them, right? That's the copy of the letter. All right, of the King Artaxerxes was read to Raham and Shimshai, the secretary and their associates. They immediately went to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. Okay, so that's what's happening in chapter 4. They start building the temple, because remember in chapter 3 they built a foundation, right? So in chapter 4 they started to build a temple, it gets halted, and we're stuck for about 15 years. Okay, chapter 5 and 6 is about how the rebuilding continues. Okay, and this is a 4-year period, 520 to 516 BC. Okay, a new governor comes in, and when a new governor comes in, he has to find out like what's going on in the land. And so he basically asks people, "Hey, this half-built thing, what's the deal with it?" Okay, and so the Jewish people are able to now like defend themselves and say like, "Hey, this is like we were building this, we were allowed to build this." But like these people like got the King Artaxerxes to tell us to say no, and now we had to stop. And so the governor's like, okay, I'm hearing conflicting accounts. What's actually going on? So he goes back to Babylon, and not goes back to Babylon. He sends word to Babylon. They say, hey, can you guys research some of this? Like, what's going on? It's been like 16 years, like or 15 years that it stopped building. Like, are they supposed to be building? Or are they not? Like, what's going on? And they find out that, oh yeah, King Darius, this is like, previous king, did send and allow the Jewish people to go back to rebuild the temple. And so because of that, they say, okay, yeah, no, you guys can start rebuilding again. Okay, so that's kind of how it rebuilds. And they find out, and then so I'm going to read verse 13 to 15 to you, right? Then, because of the decree King Darius has sent, this is King Darius saying, no, they should be rebuilding because the former king, King Cyrus, did say this. The Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai, the prophet, and Zechariah. Oh, pause. When we get to Haggai and Zechariah, those are minor prophets. We're going to get to them like many, many months, I think like a year from now. That's the time period, right? So I'm sure you can remember that, right? So when we get there, that's what's going on, okay? Exciting stuff. They finished building the temple according to the command of the God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. The temple was completed in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. So chapters 5 and 6 is how they continued to build the temple. They complete it, hooray, right? And then they celebrate the finishing of the building, but also they celebrate the Passover, okay? So then we get to chapter 7. This is when Ezra returns. So we've been doing the book of Ezra. So far, he's not even on the scene, right? So he doesn't come in until chapter 7, and he comes back at around 486 BC. That's 30 years later, right? So after the temple is complete, it's not another 30 years until Ezra comes back. So all in all, like a lot of time has passed between the return of the exiles And so like life is going, they're like doing a bunch of stuff, and now Ezra comes back. And remember, Ezra, this is like called the second major return, right? So he's returning, and the first one was with Zerubbabel. Man, these names, right? And so Ezra comes back. He is a scribe and priest. So his role is different, right? He's not like a builder here, okay? And so in verse 10, we see what Ezra is like, okay? For Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel. So the reason why this verse is important is because, keep in mind, all the Jewish people have, like the temple was destroyed. All the prominent people, all like your scribes, they've all been deported and exiled, okay? And they're in Babylon for a long time. And here you have Ezra continuing to devote himself to God and the law and all that kind of stuff, even as all of that is gone, okay? So it just shows you that he is very devoted to the Lord, even as, like there is no temple to go to worship, okay? And then in chapter 7, a big chunk of the chapter is Artaxerxes' letter to Ezra in verse 11 to 28. I'm not going to read it, but it's really neat, right? So Artaxerxes, who does not worship God, right? He's not like a follower of God or any of that kind of stuff, but he's very favorable to Ezra and the Jewish people, and continues King Darius's policies towards them, and even provides for them, right? He provides a lot of money and resources for the temple. So after they build it, they actually, like, he provides a lot of resources there. He provides a lot of animals for the sacrifices, that kind of stuff. He even gives tax-free status to the priests and the people who work in the temple. So that's pretty cool, right? It's like, oh wow, tax-free, that's nice, okay? And so it was just neat because Artaxerxes is not a worshiper of God. This is just another king, but just God is moving within these kings to get his temple built and to show favor to his people. And so Ezra's return is a moment of celebration. I'm going to read verse 27 and 28 to you. Praise be to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, who has put it into the king's heart to bring honor to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem in this way, and who has extended his good favor to me, that's Ezra, right, before the king and his advisors and all the king's powerful officials. Because the hand of the Lord my God was on me, I took courage and gathered leaders from Israel to go up with me. Right? And so this is like a real moment where Ezra is just blessed, and he sees that this is like God is in this. Okay, and in chapter 8 it's just kind of a list of the people who go back with Ezra, and it's about 2,000 people, which is a lot smaller than the first return, right? With the first return, it was like 40-something thousand people came back. This was about 2,000, and now Ezra begins to restore worship, right? Because even though they've got the foundation built, they got the temple built, it's been so long, people have forgotten how to worship the Lord, and so they're kind of like, okay, is this the correct way? And they're just kind of like stumbling around, and Ezra comes back because he's been devoted and kind of studying this and understanding this. So he comes back and kind of starts to restore that process in that worship. Okay, so that's kind of like what's going on. Why is this still important for us today? I think the first thing is this. First thing we see here is that opposition is normal. Okay, opposition in your life is normal. But I want to be specific. I'm talking about spiritual opposition. Okay, regular opposition, that's probably fine too. Right? But we're talking about spiritual opposition in your life is normal. And this opposition can be both external and internal. I think that's what I want to focus on today. A lot of times people think about spiritual opposition, and our minds kind of go to countries that are kind of closed and are very antagonistic towards Christians and other faiths. And so we think, oh yeah, opposition is normal because if you lived in this country and you brought out your Bible, they send you to jail. They do all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of where we go. That's not our experience in America. In America, we don't really have that. And so what happens when we think about spiritual opposition, I don't think we do this on purpose, but I think subconsciously we just kind of like check out. It's like, okay, yes, that is true for some people, not for me. So I'm just gonna like shut my brain down, and my brain's gonna pull out its phone and start, doom scrolling, right? Because this is not about us, but I think it is, because spiritual opposition is both external and internal. And we see that the reason why we read Matthew 13 earlier, the parable of the sower, is because we see it there. Okay, so I'm gonna read Matthew 13, 3-8. I'm going to read, and it says this, right? A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil where it produced a crop. And so I want to take the parable of the sower and kind of look at how it relates to opposition, internal and external. Okay, so I think external opposition, and that's like super rare in America. A lot of Christians complain about persecution in America. They're just whining. I just like it's not bad. Okay, it's like, oh, so somebody thinks you're a Christian and they look down on you. Boo-hoo, right? Like that's just not persecution, by the way. Okay, but it is rare. I mean, it's rare in America, but basically it's this, right? It's like it's the rocky soil, right? The sun came up, the plants are scorched, and they withered because they had no root, right? So if you do experience external persecution, which it may happen, right? But it's rare, but it may happen, right? What that one looks like is because of the persecution and the external opposition, it kind of just like it overwhelms you, and that's it affects you that way, right? So that's like kind of like the external stuff. The internal stuff, that's really what I want to focus on. I think the internal stuff kind of fit usually in two categories. One is worries, and the other one is apathy. That's the kind of opposition that comes from within yourself, okay? And we see it in worries and apathy. So worries, that's kind of like the thorny soil, right? This is seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, right? You can live and follow Jesus, but you can allow all of the worries in your life. Many are 100% legitimate, right? But you can allow them to kind of choke your faith because you're just focused on the worries and not on God, right? And so that's like the thorny soil, all right? So you have that. And the other one is apathy. Apathy is also, you're like, how is apathy opposition, right? It's like literally not doing anything, right? But that spirit and that attitude of apathy is, in a sense, opposition, because it comes out from within you, and it can actually really stymie your faith, right? And that's also actually similar to the external opposition, in that it's the rocky soil. Because when we're apathetic and we kind of like, whatever, right? What happens is we're like the rocky soil, and we don't have roots, right? Our faith isn't deep. So when other things come around, it can also dry up and choke up our faith. Or just apathy itself is like there's no root, so it doesn't get nutrients, right? And so that's what it is, right? So first point, opposition is normal, and it can be both internal and external. And the internal ones are kind of usually in our worries or in apathy, okay? The second point is this. God is sovereign in the opposition, right? Whether it's internal or external, God is still sovereign there, right? Remember, God used a pagan king to complete his temple. I mean, to me, that's kind of like the ultimate power move. It's like, I'm going to get my goals done, and I'm not even going to do it myself. You're going to do it for me, right? My enemy is going to do it for me. That is like the ultimate like display of sovereignty. And we see that here. We see that over and over again, but we see that especially here where all these kings, and keep in mind, Babylon was the empire that brought down Judah. And then God will use a Babylonian king to rebuild his temple. Right? God is sovereign. So no matter what kind of opposition you find yourself in or you find yourself facing, God is sovereign in that. And the last one is this: remain faithful during opposition. I think that's like the big like action takeaway is this. Remain faithful during opposition. Because if you do, it's worth it, right? I'm not saying, a lot of times people really struggle in their faith as they kind of like, after they like come to faith, is that they think, oh, things are going to be okay. Like, I met Jesus. Jesus is great. I'm going to give my life to Jesus. Everything is going to be okay because God's got my back, right? And yes, God does have you in his hands, but he never promised that life would just be smooth sailing, right? Because opposition is normal. What God promises is that it's going to be worth it. That living a life where you follow Jesus and trust in him, it's going to be worth it. In James chapter 1, verse 12, it says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." Right? What does that crown of life mean? I mean, in one sense, we ultimately is life eternal with God. But there's more to that, and the more to that, we're not really sure, right? Because it might be different for everybody. What God is promising is that it's worth it. And so the question that we need to ask ourselves is this: okay, opposition is normal. Check. God is sovereign in the opposition. Check. I got to remain faithful during opposition. Check. How? I mean, on external ones, that makes a little bit more sense, right? It's like, and that's how I feel like, especially like men, we have this like need to be macho. So it's like, oh yeah, bring on that external opposition, and I'm gonna stand firm. Well, we say that. Of course, when it happens, we might not, but we like to think that, right? It's like that we like to think of this like these imageries of battle. And like, oh, you're against Christians, I'm a Christian, I'm gonna stand firm, right? It's okay. It's probably not gonna happen in your life, especially if you live in America, right? But how do you do it on the internal stuff? Those are the hard ones, right? How do we remain faithful when the opposition to our faith is actually coming from within? And so I want to take a look. Remember, the two categories are usually worries and apathy. I think if worries is the opposition you're facing, I think the key is in Matthew 11:28. This Jesus saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." We gotta go to Jesus and kind of like give him our stuff, right? And it makes sense that this is the only way, because if you could just get rid of the opposition internally, which is the worry, you would do it, right? You worry because you can't control it, right? If you could control it, you'd just be like, oh, I'm really worried about this. Click, drag to the trash can, delete. That's a Windows, right? If you're using a Mac. I don't use a Mac, so I'm like, how do you get delete files? You press delete or something like that. But that's how we think. If it was simple, we would just delete it from our minds and be like, worries gone, anxiety gone. Some people do think this way, and that's why some people, when like you talk to them about like anxiety and worries, they're just like, just think happy thoughts, just get rid of it. It's like, if I could, I would. Like, that's the whole point of this, is I can't, right? And so if worries is the opposition that's coming from within you, you can't get rid of. That's the whole point. You have to go to the Lord. You got to go to Jesus and be like, Jesus, I can't get rid of this. Like, I can't just like sleep it off. I can't just like think happy thoughts. Like, this is something you will have to do, and that's what we do. And God says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. That's the faith part. It's that if I can actually do this, if I actually take it to Jesus, God can actually do something about this. Okay. Now, like, asterisks, I'm not saying that this is like oh wait, like this is it, don't do it. I'm not saying that things like counseling and therapy are not good things. Those are all good. I think God uses that very often to do it, okay? Because I think some Christians then kind of go a little overboard and they're just like, mental health, that's all phony baloney. Just go to Jesus and he'll take care of it, which is true, but I think God also uses a lot of the wonderful like counselors and therapists out there, right? So I'm not saying that's never do that, but I'm saying the first thing we do is bring it to the Lord. Okay, so that's the worry side. Okay, but what if it's apathy? I think that's even harder. It's like, because the opposition is not even this thing that attacks you. The opposition is that you can't do anything. You're just like blah, right? I think if that's the issue, if the opposition in spirit, if the spiritual opposition in you that's internal is apathy, I think there are usually one of several reasons, and we'll look at some of those reasons and then say, okay, if that's the issue, what do we do? I think the first possible reason for the internal opposition of apathy, spiritual apathy in your life, is some kind of unresolved sin. Right? Something in your life that is just not compatible with the gospel. It's not pleasing to the Lord. And what happens there is this, right? Because it's natural for us to want to live a life that is consistent with our beliefs. We want everybody, whether it's like good or bad, like that's a human nature is like that. We want to live a life that's consistent with our beliefs. And if that is not matching, well, something's got to happen, right? You're not going to feel well, because internally you're just going to be like, I don't think I want to do this, and I keep doing this, right? And so what usually happens is something's got to give, and if it's not the things you're doing, it's not the unresolved sin, then your beliefs and the way you're thinking about it has to kind of like readjust to match what your life is like. So you can actually kind of have this like, I don't want to call it peace because I don't think it's like real peace, but at least it's like pseudo peace, you know? And so I think that could be one thing, where if you have unresolved sin, then whatever like fervor you have for the Lord, if you don't resolve that sin, it kind of needs to get pulled down a little bit. So then at least you're like, okay, at least I have like consistency or some consistency in my life, okay? So if that's where we're at, then what we have to do is we got to confess, repent, and then receive forgiveness, right? Because that's like the whole point of sin, not the point of sin, the whole deal with sin is that God is like, yeah, you have that, but like bring it to me. Don't run away from it. Don't hide it. Bring it to me and receive forgiveness, like receive God's grace. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. That was the whole point of that, is so we can be forgiven. And so if that's us, right? If we're in a place where we have unresolved sin, we want to confess, repent, and receive that forgiveness, and then we're going to be more balanced. Of course, you know, we always struggle, right? So this is like not a one-time thing. This is like a daily thing. Okay, so that's one reason that apathy might be the internal opposition. The second one could be spiritual disciplines, right? That we're not kind of like just like doing the things that are like practicing our faith, right? And spiritual disciplines are anything from like prayer to reading scripture to, you know, blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff, right? And so if that's you, if you're like, yeah, I don't really have, like, my faith and the way I live it out is not disciplined, if you will. It's just, I don't like doing it. I don't have a plan. I just kind of like, blah, right? If that's you, I would say start small, right? I think one of the reasons why spiritual disciplines are so hard, especially for like young people as they're kind of growing in their faith, is that they feel like I have to be perfect in everything. I have to make sure I wake up every day an hour early to pray and read my Bible. I have to do this. I have to do this. I can't miss this. And that actually becomes a burden, and it kind of becomes overwhelming, right? So start small, right? If you feel like, oh wow, like I don't really do anything for my faith, okay, let's try something, right? What like anything, right? Just start small and then be faithful about that tiny little thing. What happens is that's how you grow. And if you think about it, I was like, that's like pretty normal, right? If you were trying to get, like guys, if you go to college, you have some extra time, you're like, I just want to get jacked, right? I just want to come back from college and be like 20 pounds heavier, full of muscle, and impress everyone, right? But you go to the gym, you're like, so many exercises, what do I do? You start small, right? You don't start with like, max weight, 4 sets of everything, going to the gym, 4 or 5 days a week. It's like, hey, start small. Try 2 sets and just like lightweight, And then over time, it gets easier and gets better, right? Same thing with your faith, right? Start small if that's where you're at. If you have apathy, or if it's spiritual disciplines that are lacking, start small, okay? That's why we like have all these different options. Like, hey, try this online Bible study. Try this. There's all these little ways you can do that. Okay. Last one is this. I think the last thing that kind of is a reason for our apathy, our spiritual apathy, is distractions. That we're just distracted. We have so much stuff going on in our lives that we don't have the bandwidth to have something spiritual and devote time to Jesus. Okay. That's very normal, especially in America where we have and especially in our culture where it's like, go, 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 you gotta like achieve this, right? And so if that's the case, or you might not know, I would say this: check your treasures and your time. If you sit back and if you're thinking like, maybe I don't think it's unresolved sin, I don't think it's spiritual disciplines, maybe it's distractions. Sit back and say, how are you spending your time and how are you spending your money? That often is a pointer to like where your priorities are. And then you can see like, oh yeah, these are the things that like distract me from God. Right? And once you know, then you can actually do something about it. Right? If you find yourself like, I spend, all my time doing this. And here's the thing. Distractions aren't necessarily bad things. You can be distracted by a really good thing. If you think, man, I spend all my time studying just like my parents want me to, right? It's like, sure, that's great, but like that could become a distraction to your faith, right? And so distractions might not be a bad thing in itself, but the problem is when your treasures and your time and your just like your energy is taken away from God, that can distract you, and then the result of that can be apathy in your faith. Okay, so so how do we remain faithful when it's internal oppositions? It could be unresolved sin, spiritual disciplines, distractions. We've got to go confess, repent, receive forgiveness. Start small with your spiritual disciplines, and then check your treasures and time. Okay, and then bring all of those burdens to Jesus. And just remember this, and so we'll close with this. Opposition is normal. Like this is going to happen. And you're going to have times in your life where you will have more success in your faith, and you will have times when you'll have more failure. Right? God is sovereign in all of it, and God's love is unconditional in all of it. And so don't get down and and go into despair when things aren't going well. But just understand like this is where we're at, and understand which direction you need to face. Okay? So let's pray.